Channel Introduction. The Autopsy of Absolute Volition. The history of progress is a curated narrative of survivors. But for every breakthrough that changed the world, 1,000 masterpieces were erased by a single, catastrophic variable. As the eye glides over the cold, brushed steel of a laboratory desk, we open the forensic archive of Defunct Logic. We do not negate the necessity of absolute willpower. Unwavering determination and stubborn constancy are the required fuel for any significant achievement. Yet, we investigate the terrifying reality that even extreme dedication is not a guarantee of success. Our focus is on the brilliant failures where the commitment was total, but the outcome was deferred or destroyed by external forces. As flickering screens reveal the blueprints of a forgotten future, observe the microscopic scars on ancient gears and the fractured careers of elite human specimens. We perform autopsies on the brilliance that didn't make it, not because of a lack of character, but because they encountered the absolute inertia of a hostile universe.
The Refugee of Le Mans, the anatomy of a staged failure. 1. The ghost in the machine. The eye glides over a cold, brushed aluminum surface where a thin layer of oil and dust obscures the mechanical soul of a legend. A finger gloved in dark leather slowly draws a line on the matte blue bodywork, revealing for an instant the reflection of the bronze below before the shadow returns to dominate the Venice workshop. Beach. This is the starting point of Defunct Logic. We are not observing a simple sports car. We are performing a forensic autopsy on a prototype of absolute volition. In 1964, the Ford GT40 was not a winner. It was a chaotic collection of aerodynamic instability and catastrophic brake failure. The logic of Henry Ford II was fueled by a singular, vengeful motive: to erase the Ferrari dynasty from the asphalt of France after a failed acquisition attempt. But the willpower of a billionaire is insufficient without the stubborn constancy of a refugee. Ken Miles, the British-born tank commander and engineering savant, understood the kinetic energy of the chassis in a way the computers of Dearborn could not compute. He was the biological interface between the abstract mathematics of torque and the brutal reality of endurance. 2. The physics of high-velocity instability. Observe the blueprints spread across a wooden table, stained with coffee and grease. The early iterations of the GT40, the Mecche, were death traps. At 200 miles per hour on the Mulsanne Strait, the nose of the car would lift, transforming a ground vehicle into an unguided projectile. The air was not a medium to pass through, but a hostile fluid that sought to destroy the machine. The willpower of Ken Miles manifested in the thousands of wool tufts taped to the bodywork, a primitive but effective visualization of airflow. He spent months in the desert heat of Riverside, driving until the brakes glowed a translucent orange, melting the hubs and fusing the pads to the rotors. This was the era of material science failure. The logic of the 427 cubic inch 5.8 engine was a brutalist solution to a complex problem. Raw American displacement to overcome European finesse. Every gear change was a violent collision of steel, a tactile reminder that the machine was a living, breathing entity on the verge of structural collapse. Miles recorded every vibration, every temperature spike, translating the car's screams into engineering data that would eventually stabilize the beast. 3. The human vector, the refugee versus the suits. The perspective shifts to the pit wall, where men in narrow ties and short-sleeved white shirts hold stopwatches like religious icons. This is the socio-economic friction of the project. Ken Miles was an anomaly in the Ford corporate database. He was difficult, unpolished, and possessed a technical arrogance born of absolute competence. Leo Beebe, the architect of Ford's public image, saw Miles as a liability, a beatnik who didn't fit the standardized mold of a Ford hero. Here, the Murphy variable is not a mechanical glitch, but a human one. The internal conflict between the racing division led by Carroll Shelby and the marketing division in Michigan created a state of structural paralysis. The determination of Miles to perfect the J-car and the GT40 Mark II was constantly threatened by the bureaucratic inertia of a company that valued the appearance of success over the reality of the engineering. The willpower was total, but the organizational logic was fractured. Ford wanted a victory that looked like an advertisement. Miles wanted a victory that was a mathematical absolute, untainted by the compromise of public relations. 3. The 1966 trajectory, Daytona and Sebring. As flickering screens show the grainy black and white footage of the high banks at Daytona, the vector of success becomes visible. Miles isn't just driving, he is executing a mathematical proof. He wins the 24 hours of Daytona, he wins the 12 hours of Sebring. The logic of the Triple Crown of endurance racing, Daytona, Sebring, and Le Mans, in a single year, is within his grasp. No man has ever achieved it. Observe the focused intensity in his eyes through the goggles, a singular intention laser beam that ignores the fatigue of a 48-hour workweek. The machine and the man have achieved a state of synergy. The 427 engine has been refined into a reliable hammer, capable of pounding the pavement for thousands of miles without a catastrophic drop in oil pressure. The victory at Le Mans is no longer a what-if, it is a statistical certainty. But in the quantum landscape of high-stakes racing, the closer you get to the objective, the more the external variables begin to compress the outcome. The corporate machine was already preparing to harvest his effort and discard his identity in favor of a collective brand image. 5. The Mulsanne night, 210 miles per hour. The forensic eye follows the GT40 as it ripped through the rain at Le Mans. It is 3 in the morning. The headlights are mere pinpricks of light in a universe of darkness and spray. Inside the cockpit, the heat is suffocating, a mix of gasoline fumes and the smell of hot fiberglass. Miles is in the zone, a psychological state of absolute focus where the car ceases to be an object and becomes an extension of his nervous system. He is leading the race by miles. The Ferrari 330 P3s have crumbled under the relentless pace he has set. The logic of the refugee engineer has triumphed over the prestige of Maranello. He has broken the lap record multiple times, pushing the limits of the experimental disc brakes until they were white-hot. This was the pinnacle of human endeavor, a man at the height of his powers, driving a machine he helped build, toward a glory that was mathematically his. He was not just racing against other men, he was racing against the limitations of the physical world and the ticking clock of the Ford marketing strategy. 6. The corporate interference, the staged finish. The perspective pulls back to the Ford garage, a clinical space of light and shadow. Leo Beebe and the Ford executives are orchestrating a narrative. They don't want a singular hero, they want a corporate victory. They conceive a plan for a dead heat, 3 Ford GT40s crossing the finish line together, a choreographed image for the morning newspapers. The order is sent to the pit wall. Slow down. Ken Miles, leading the greatest race of his life, is told to relinquish his lead. Observe the jaw of Miles tighten as the instruction reaches him. The willpower of the individual is compressed by the weight of the institution. He is told that if he doesn't comply, he will be yanked from future programs. The commitment to the team, a stubborn constance that had fueled years of development, is used as a weapon against him. He realizes that his success is a threat to the brand's desire for a collective, sanitized triumph. The individual brilliance of the 0.1% is being smoothed over to fit the 99% of corporate comfort. 7. The technicality of the 0%. Focus on the clock above the grandstands. 3 cars approach the finish line in a tight, artificial formation. Miles has slowed down, allowing Bruce McLaren and Dick Hutcherson to catch up. They cross the line in a perfect trio. The PR logic is satisfied, but the database of the ACO, the officials of Le Mans, contains a fatal technicality. Because Bruce McLaren's car started 60 feet further back on the grid, he had technically covered more distance in the same 24 hours. Despite Miles being the faster driver, the dominant leader, and the architect of the car's soul, he is classified as second. The victory is stolen by a bureaucratic algorithm. The logic was correct, the effort was 100%, but the outcome was rendered defunct by a staged reality. The Triple Crown was erased by a photo op. Miles walks away from the podium without a trophy, his face a mask of exhausted stoicism. He has been metabolized by the system, his data extracted, his glory reassigned. 8. The breadvan and the J-car, the next logic. 59 days later, the forensic eye moves to the Riverside International Raceway. The sun is a harsh, unforgiving light on the desert floor. Miles is testing the Ford J-Car, the successor to the GT40. It is a radical departure, a bread van design intended to be even lighter, featuring a revolutionary honeycomb aluminum chassis. This was the pinnacle of aerospace-grade ambition applied to automotive engineering. The willpower is still there. He hasn't let the Le Mans betrayal slow his drive for perfection. He is pushing the J-Car to its structural limits, analyzing the high-speed lift that plagued the early GT40s. But the J-Car possesses a catastrophic aerodynamic flaw in its unfinished tail section. At the end of the backstraight, as the car reaches 200 miles per hour, the rear lift becomes uncontrollable. The mojo of his driving cannot compensate for a vacuum of downforce. Observe the sudden, violent wobble of the rear wing. The physics of the defunct future become active. The car flips, disintegrating in a fireball of magnesium and fuel. Ken Miles is gone in an instant. The man who solved the GT40 was killed by the logic of its replacement, a machine that failed the fundamental test of stability. 9. The forensic analysis of the crash, honeycomb and heat. Observe the wreckage in the Riverside dust. The honeycomb aluminum chassis, designed for lightness, offered no structural protection during the roll. The material science of 1966 had reached its limit. Miles was testing a survival cell that was itself a vector of failure. The engineers realized too late that the aerodynamic lift was not a variable that could be managed by driver skill alone. It was a structural defect in the J-Car's geometry. This crash forced a total redesign, leading to the Mark IV, but the cost was the most valuable biological asset in the Ford racing program. The autopsy of the crash revealed that Miles was trying to fight the lift until the very last second, his hands still gripping the steering wheel as the car inverted. This was the ultimate manifestation of his absolute will, fighting a law of physics that had already decided his fate. 10. The multiverse of the winner. What if? The speculative physics of the what if are agonizing. If Miles had ignored the order and finished his lap at full speed, he would be the only man in history to win Daytona, Sebring, and Le Mans in the same year. He would have been the face of the Ford racing program for another decade, potentially leading the transition to the Mark IV as a celebrated champion rather than a frustrated test driver. The development of the GT40 would have been his legacy, undisputed. Instead, he remains the refugee of Le Mans, a ghost in the records. We live in the survivor's version of the 1966 race, where Bruce McLaren is the hero and the Ford brand is the victor. But the true logic of that victory belonged to a man who died 59 days later in a gray prototype that nobody remembers. The 0% that didn't make it. The timeline was reset by a corporate directive and a sudden loss of downforce, leaving us with a distorted narrative of human achievement. 11. The entropy of corporate memory. Today, the GT40 Mark II that won Le Mans sits in a museum, polished and pristine. But the J-Car remains a footnote, a dangerous experiment that claimed the life of the man who made the GT40 possible. The eye traces the cold, silent surface of the display car. It is a monument to a success that was built on a foundation of ethical failure. The logic of the corporation outlived the logic of the engineer. This is the ultimate lesson of Defunct Logic. The universe does not reward the best, it rewards the ones who align with the dominant narrative. The willpower of Ken Miles was absolute, but it was metabolized by the Ford Motor Company and turned into a marketing asset, leaving the man himself in the silt of history. His name was eventually added to the Hall of Fame, but the Triple Crown remains an empty slot in the history books, a haunting reminder of what happens when the 0.1% meets the friction of the corporate machine. 12. The legacy of the defunct engineer. As the perspective pulls back from the ruins of the Riverside crash, we see the impact of Miles's work. The GT40 would go on to win 3 more times, including the 1967 victory with the Mark IV, a car that incorporated the lessons learned from the fatal J-Car crash. The data he collected, the cards of engineering he stacked, became the standard for endurance racing for the next 50 years. His logic was so sound that it couldn't be killed by a crash or a corporate order. It was merely absorbed. We live in a world defined by his invisible contributions. The refugee was right. The time was fatal. The outcome remains anonymous. Maintain your focus. Stay analytical. Your participation in this archive is the only variable that remains within our control.
The Murphy Variable Protocol. Every technical collapse and every derailed career confirms that the universe possesses an inherent tendency toward chaos. We must accept a painful truth. While the absolute will to succeed is fundamental to creating value, sometimes it is insufficient to overcome the statistically impossible. The law of Murphy does not care about your dedication. In the vast quantum landscape of the multiverse, catastrophic probability is a real mathematical vector. The variable that determines if this forensic archive continues to expand is your interaction with the data. As the perspective pulls back from a collection of fragmented relics, a cracked silicon chip, a tarnished Olympic medal, and a faded political manifesto, your specific analysis completes the record. If you value a deep dive into the mechanics of the forgotten, join the collective by subscribing, and of course, liking, to the Defunct Logic Protocol. Your insights in the comments serve as the peer review this research requires. Help us identify the next case of brilliance lost to the statistical graveyards of technology, sport, or power. History is written by the winners, but the truth is buried in the debris of the defeated. Maintain your focus. Stay analytical. Your participation is the only variable that remains within our control.